Welcome to Activist Planet. I am your host, Juan Carlos Giraldo. Today, we have a new episode in the podcast, and it's about a constant threat to birds, and is window collisions. Every day, birds hit windows in houses or buildings. And my guest today is Heidi Trudell, a researcher, consultant, and specialist who works to prevent this problem that is affecting the bird population. Hello, Heidi. How are you?
I'm doing well, Juan Carlos. How are you?
I am doing well. Welcome to Activist Planet. Heidi, today we will discuss about a concerning issue that's affecting the world's bird population: the dead collisions in windows, whether in houses or buildings. As we know, birds are essential to our ecosystems and biodiversity, right? So, but before I start, would you mind share briefly your background with our audience and how you are involved in as a consultant or researcher in preventing bird collisions with windows and glass?
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having me. I started in 2003 as a bird collision monitor. Um, well, even before that, I was just a student on a campus that had big, shiny windows. And so, because everyone on campus knew that I loved birds, they would start telling me where they saw dead ones. So I, of course, started looking. And that was 2003. I never really stopped. So, starting in 2014, I got more into the consulting side of things because I realized that biologists talking to biologists won't actually fix anything. And it's only through working with industry and policy that you can actually get significant change. Because industry people are not reading the Wilson Journal of Ornithology, unfortunately. And what we publish makes sense to bird people, but it really doesn't mean anything in concrete terms to industry folks. So I started consulting, with architects, with actual glass manufacturers. It's been a really interesting process because the the whole field is so new. Concrete and steel have been around forever, so those are very well understood technologies. Glass collisions for birds have only really been studied since the late 1970s. So, yeah, it's a very new and quickly changing realm to study. So, trying to stay on top of the technologies and keep ahead of architects love glass.
And you are following your job on LinkedIn and another pages, and and then you are doing a great job. Congrats for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, today, before recording this episode, I was trying to think what the sound would be like when bird hit a window in a house, and I recorded this sound in the house. And listen one second. Pretty much, and then I went to internet and did my research, and then pretty much it's the same sound they call whamp sound, right? When a little bird hits the window and dies from this collision. So let's start this conversation, Heidi. First of all, to get into the context of the topic of this conversation, I would like to ask you, what is the main cause of the decline in the bird population?
So, outdoor cats are the number one cause of bird declines in the wild. At least for North America, it's around 2.5 billion birds per year. And that is the only thing worse than windows. Windows, until very recently, were guesstimated to kill about 1 billion birds per year in North America. That number might be closer to 2 based on the newest study from last month. But that is to say that basically windows are extremely bad. Cats are basically windows that go and actively chase the birds. So if we can get both of those handled, we are doing wonderful things. We have a lot of work to do.
No, no, I bet. Yes, always people suggest keep your cats indoor. Let's dig a little bit in this topic, Heidi. I don't know if it's a silly question, but why do birds hit windows and glass? And how many die in the United States each year?
The short answer for why birds hit glass is basically it's invisible. Birds are not unique in hitting glass. People do it, cats do it, dogs do it, kangaroos do it, deer, moose. It's harder to find animals that have not hit glass. But basically, the risk for things hitting glass is based on is there glass near that animal or is there an animal near glass? It's simply invisible. You can look at the new Apple building in California to see that you can have all kinds of PhDs and still hurt yourself pretty badly walking into it because it is not meant to be a visible barrier. Um, I did mention earlier that 1 to 2 billion birds every year die from colliding with glass in the US. But I should note that when people think of glass collisions as a problem, most people are thinking that it's high-rise buildings because skyscrapers are, up in the sky and that's where birds are. What's really kind of terrifying is um, we're all pointing fingers at skyscrapers, but skyscrapers cumulatively kill
Wow.
about 1%. Yeah, so high rises average, I think it's like 27 birds per building per year. Low rises
Okay.
average about 23 birds per building per year. Homes, like residential, normal, single family homes, it can be anywhere from 2 to 10. But if you have bird feeders, that number goes up to over 30 on average.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And for
Interesting.
every strike that we know about, there are like 5 to 8 that we won't ever know about because we're not in that room when it hits, or it hits but not
Mhm.
hard enough to hear it. And so some of that research is really alarming because we think we're doing the right thing by planting native plants in our yard and attracting birds to feed them, but it's actually just luring them closer to dangerous areas.
Wow, I didn't know. Well, it's a very insightful. When I was preparing these questions for our conversation, Haiti, I found that some authors mentioned that there are two types of window collisions. Is this true? Only two types, or that we have right now, or what are your opinion? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a really good question because when people are or so when I'm working with architects, we break it down to two types, daytime and nighttime. But if you're talking to homeowners, there are kind of four types. And nighttime almost doesn't apply for homeowners. Very few residential collisions will happen at night. So while yes, everyone should turn off unnecessary lights at night, cover your windows, so blinds and blackout curtains to keep the light in, um, and have dark sky approved exterior lighting, so downward facing on timers, dimmed, lighting only what you need to, when you need to. Motion sensors are great. So nighttime strikes are generally more of an urban area situation where you have these super brightly lit islands of glow that birds are trying to navigate around. But homeowners not only have regular day strikes, but they may also have feeder strikes. So if a bird is at a feeder and something startles it, or there's a hawk in the neighborhood, that panic flight isn't necessarily a daytime strike or a nighttime strike. And daytime is just point A to point B, regular flying. This is a panic flight, so they will hit harder. So that's something that homeowners need to factor in, and therefore you should keep your bird feeders up against the glass or within 3 feet. So the closer, the safer. At about, yeah, above 3 feet, birds can get enough momentum to severely injure or kill themselves when they do hit. Real quick, the fourth type of collision is birds attacking their own reflections as a territorial thing. So collisions do happen year round. The reason it happens more often during migration is because you simply have more birds moving through. It's not that they're unfamiliar with the area, because even birds that are familiar with the area will still hit. So winter birds will hit fairly lightly throughout the winter. In spring, you'll see that first push of migrating species. And these numbers can change pretty dramatically. In Oklahoma, they have more springtime collisions than they have in the fall. Most other places have much higher fall collisions than spring. But so in Michigan and in Illinois, so broadly speaking, upper Midwest, um, we have fairly low winter numbers, pretty much double the winter is what we get for spring. Spring and summer are almost comparable, but a totally different set of species, which is so strange to me because, like, oh, okay, it's another 40 birds for this building, but the species don't hardly match up at all. And then in fall, you get a really wide variety and an absolutely staggering body count.
Well, very interesting. And do you think that the collisions happen more during the migration process or during any time of the year?
Yeah, migration is bad, but there's no time of year that it's.
Last year, actually, 1 year ago ish, it was the first time that I saw a building that has this kind of design. That beer prevention was in. I was in a conference at Yale School of Management in Connecticut, and I didn't notice. I started walking from the hallway. I said, "What is that?" And it was like of course, the window, the glass, and some kind of dots in like a horizontal way, and some kind of like a scoop, half a scoop, something like on the other side, like both together. I said, "What is that?" And I saw the legend, I said, what the bird collection was fantastic. Heidi, since you work in prevention, with my opinion, is related to education as well. How can we reduce bird collisions with windows? Any suggestions that you have for the audience?
If you had asked me a year or two ago, I would have said fix your windows, and I would have given you a dozen different ways to do that. Thankfully, flap.org, the Fatal Light Awareness Program of Canada, flap.org, has wonderful resources for homeowners. The American Bird Conservancy does too. So there are ways that you can start on your own homes, but I have to say, right now, it's not that I've done a 180 because we've always known that policy does more than individual. Because if I fix a home, I save maybe 20 birds a year. But if I can get legislation requiring new developments to go bird safe, then that's like 20 birds per building per year. So the broader implication there, like New York City just passed a code at the end of 2019 requiring bird safe construction for new buildings, which is huge. If any city is going to get pushback about construction or logistics or anything like that, it's going to be New York City. So the fact that they passed it makes me think that nobody else has an excuse to not be doing that. The downside, of course, is that legislation tends to have loopholes, and a lot of codes are written so that you can follow them to a T and still have a very dangerous building. But if we don't have policymakers that know about the problem, then we can't pass, you know, any ordinances. If the ordinances aren't good, like it's just a chicken and egg issue with education, and I think it's going to have
Exactly.
to be policy, like just reaching out to council members and being like, hey, sustainability is
Certainly.
in everybody's mind right now. We're making pollinator gardens everywhere, and there's a giant wall of glass next to this pollinator garden. We can't separate these things out because everything is connected. Talking to council members about urban sustainability issues, like my local library had requested a grant to fix their windows, and the grant was declined because it was ineligible because they said it was not a sustainability topic, because it wasn't water quality, it wasn't recycling, and that kind of blew my mind.
Some weeks ago, we have some sad news in New York City, about a beautiful Eurasian owl that died because in a building. Would you mind sharing your thoughts with the audience about the death of Flaco, the famous Eurasian eagle owl in New York, and why this situation is a clear example of a call to action to build bird-friendly buildings? What are your thoughts?
It's so sad. Um, So Flaco's death was unfortunately very predictable from the start when his enclosure was vandalized. Like human environments, no matter where they are extremely dangerous for birds. And by virtue of eating rodents, Flaco was immediately susceptible to rodenticide exposure, along with the normal threats of cars, glass power lines, everything else. In captivity, he was eating the best diet he could have gotten. When you have medical care, so for example, falconry is kind of a controversial thing. There's still a very active falconry community in the United States. And I think one of the most misunderstood things about falconry is that they take young birds from the wild and train them, hunt with them. Traditionally, in the wild, three-quarters of raptors will not survive their first year of life. Hunting is a really challenging thing for them. So with falconry, they basically get a year of head start. It's training wheels. They get, their deworming medications, so any parasite load that they might have had get cleared of that. They have medical care, a solid diet of whatever tasty things they get fed. Um, and a lot of falconers do release their birds after the first year or three. Um, so essentially, the birds that they're releasing into the wild are healthier than they would have been had they grown up um, not in captivity, as it were. And they know how to hunt, which, like, surviving that first year is so important. And Flaco had 13 years in well, I guess 14 years in captivity. No, 13, because he died right before his 14th birthday. You take a bird that didn't have that head start. Everyone was rooting for him. He figured out how to hunt successfully, and while there's no way he couldn't have had rodenticides in his system. Rodenticides will not make a bird hit windows. That's that's not the connection I'm making. But it was almost inevitable. It's just a race between one or the other, and it's heartbreaking. I've worked at two different zoos. I've worked at two different zoos, and you get to know birds as individuals, and you really appreciate what they're up against in the wild. And for me, it's a little bit of a relief to see that the rest of the world is now experiencing what zookeepers have been feeling watching this whole thing play out. Also make me wonder though, 1,000 songbirds at McCormick Place on October 5th, it did generate some outrage, but not enough to really do much. And within a week of Flaco's death, some legislation for New York State had been renamed after him.
Heidi, I have a question for you. I bet you have picked a lot of dead birds from the ground during your research. How many birds did you collect the most in a single day that you recall?
Oh, a single day? They weren't all fresh, but my worst day was over 30. The day before, I had picked up 11 fresh birds at that building, and it was my lunch break. I didn't have time to pick up everything else that was there, so I went back the next day and picked up 30 more pieces of it was the first time I had checked the building, and it was bad. The highest percentage of birds that I've gotten at projects in Illinois, I think it was 17% of the birds that I picked up were hummingbirds. That's where the 2 by 2 inch spacing when it comes to patterns is so important, because some people will stick up a hawk sticker and, you know, the bird store sold it to them, said it would be fine, but birds will just try to fly around it because they just see a stationary object hovering midair. So for hummingbirds, 2 by 2 inch spacing, for dots, for stripes, whatever. But if we're not helping the smallest birds, then I will say that my freezer list is over 150 species. I want to say it's close to 170.
What species, for example, robins, cardinals?
Usually it's hummingbirds, warblers, so many warblers, lots of thrushes, doves. I'm actually pulling up my spreadsheet right now. Okay, so my spreadsheet is up to 172 species. For windows, there have been 79 species of things that hit windows that I've picked up. Of course, so when I lived in Texas, I was mostly picking up roadkill. I was also working on a wind farm, so we know how that goes. Not good. But power lines, fences, cats, you name it, any dead things. I probably have some flavor of experience with them. But yeah, so I've picked up dead things in Texas, Illinois, and Michigan primarily. But woodpeckers were oddly well represented for Michigan for sure. Not as many in Illinois. Lots of kinglets up here. But it's also really interesting to see that different buildings will get different things. So in Illinois, I thought white-throated sparrows were hitting like popcorn. Got to Michigan, and I'd have an entire season at a fairly normal building. We'd get juncos. Again, so many warblers. Black-throated blue warblers hit surprisingly often for how infrequently you see them in the wild. Lots of Tennessees, yellow rumps, Nashville warblers.
What I saw here in Boston, where my neighborhood here in Newton, is pretty much like the classic sparrow.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yes, pretty much. I'm some eventually some like a American goldfinch, but pretty much
yeah,
the sparrows.
yeah. I I've only picked up one American tree sparrow that hit a window, but it's always worth checking because you never know what's going to be found. In Abilene, Texas, I think it was like the first county record for scarlet tanager hit a window down there. The only Kentucky warbler I ever saw on my college campus had hit a window. We get lots of kingfishers at windows in
Hmm.
Michigan.
Kingfishers,
Yeah,
my God.
yeah. So also there's an interesting difference in terms of, I mentioned high rises versus low rises. Waterfowl, so duck, those are things that you will get in urban areas that you really don't get so much at low rises. I've been monitoring low rises in Michigan since 2015, and zero woodcocks for low rise buildings. Meanwhile, in downtown Detroit, that's one of their normal finds. It's really, really strange. Like two chimney swifts in 21 years. I know they happen, I've found them, but you're much more likely to get almost anything else. So, yeah, the dynamics are always very interesting. And, as I mentioned, one of my buildings in Michigan gets tons of kinglets. That building probably kills.
Kinglets, the
Yeah,
crowned kinglets, they are
yeah.
so beautiful. They are so
Mhm,
tiny.
mhm, and
Beautiful.
creepers also hit much, much more frequently than you would expect. But so my worst building in Michigan kills an absolute minimum of like 300 birds a year. It's probably closer to 800, but
Mhm.
there's a coyote that lives on site, and
Oh,
we know there's
he's
coyote
hitting them.
poop, there's raccoon poop. We know that we're not even finding the half of what hits. So,
Yeah.
most of my other buildings in Michigan might get 2 or 3 kinglets a year. That building might get a dozen in a day.
And Heidi, we are almost wrapping up. I have briefly two questions. How the company, let's see, the big companies
Mhm.
or the architectural companies, they are aware or say, you know what, let's move forward. Do you have any experience working with architectures, and design companies?
So, most architects, unless there is a bird safe code, are answering to their client. And unless their client says we need bird safe glass, the bird safe glass is probably going to be value engineered out of the project. Unless, yeah, unless that idea gets into the planning really early and can be combined with other things like thermal control, because there are a lot of bird safe products that can help with reducing solar heat gain. That's really when it needs to happen. The biggest company that I've seen, or the biggest firm that I've seen being proactive about collisions is Studio Gang. They have basically told all of their clients, you will be getting a bird safe building. Here are a bunch of options for how it can be made bird safe. You get to decide, but they basically will not build a bad building, which is extremely admirable. I wish more companies would do that.
Yeah, I think it's a process. It's
Hmm.
everybody is every people. I mean, all of us we start to
Yeah.
get more awareness and and create spread the word. More people will and more company will start to working on it.
It's an interesting point too, because when you know better, you do better, hopefully. But this is essentially the asbestos and lead paint of our time. Like once you know that there's something different that you should be doing, Do you really have an excuse?
Yeah.
It comes down to dollar signs and code. There is a little bit of hope in areas that don't have code, because if you convince an entire university campus to update their internal design code or design guidelines, or hospitals or other building owners at large scale,
Airports.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, actually airports have a lot of bird safe glass just because
Really?
of, yeah, it might not be on the best surface to be effective, or as effective as it could be, but almost any airport you go to, you'll see a lot of either tiny dots,
Hmm.
which the tiny dots aren't great. If they were slightly larger and spaced a little further apart, that'd be
Oh,
great.
I see.
Um, or you'll see stripes of ceramic frit on the glass, and that's all for thermal control. And if they just did it on the outside of the glass, it would double as a bird safe option.
That's
So
good.
I think, yeah, airports are
Yeah.
going in a good direction.
Good point. Heidi, any suggestion that you have for the, let's see, for the regular people? No, let's forget a little bit. Let's put aside, not forget, let's put aside about the big companies, the buildings. I listened to, or I watched one of your podcasts with, I don't remember who was the lady who interviewed you,
Mhm,
and you suggest put a CD
mhm,
outside of the window.
mhm,
It cheaper? I mean, it's not probably the beautiful thing holding a outside of the window or inside. I
mhm.
don't know, a CD, which I don't use anymore.
Yeah, you'd have to use a lot of them ideally. Um, so you can look on the, I think it's Bird Safe London, Ontario. They have a website that has a list of different chalk markers,
Oh, I
glass
see.
markers. You can take a dry erase marker even, and on the outside of the glass, draw stripes every 2 inches. Ideally, a white or bright color.
Hmm,
Darker colors are a little bit harder to make the contrast work, but that's what I've done at my own house. I've done
that's good.
2 inch stripes with a white marker, except when I ran out of the white, I switched to pink. So, and that's been up for 2 years here so far. Um, Super quick, super easy. It buys you time until you figure out what you want to do long term. If you can't get to the outside of the glass to hang your dozen CDs spaced strategically so there's not a whole lot of room to fly between them, maybe do that in a room where you don't want to look out the windows.
Right.
But if you have standard size post it notes, if you make a very dense checkerboard of those, you're getting a lot of contrast. Um, Again, it's all best on the outside of the glass, but if you can't
Yeah.
get to it in a pinch, that'll buy you some time until you can figure out a longer term option. But
Perfect.
definitely move your feeders as close to the glass as you possibly can,
Oh,
um, and keep your cats inside.
exactly.
Or build a catio. Catios are great.
Exactly. Katie, I don't know if you would like to add anything to this conversation.
I mean, really, I'm just so glad that this topic is getting more coverage. I would love at some point for you to interview Rosemary. I actually just emailed you her information. She's doing this exact same thing, but in Costa Rica.
Oh, that's cool. Well, where people can contact you, Heidi.
So my email address is all one word, justsavebirds@gmail.com. On most social media, I'm at justsavebirds. Again, all one word, no spaces. I do have a Patreon, patreon.com/justsavebirds. I'm in the process of redirecting most of those funds right now to either fully support Washtenaw Safe Passage, which is my local safe passage group here in Southeast Michigan, or our local library, who was denied the grant for their bird safe glass. So it's going to offset some of those costs. But also about suggested reading and further information. There's a
Exactly. Education
wonderful,
is critical right now.
yeah, there is a book called 101 Ways to Help Birds. It was written by Laura Erickson, I think in 2006. So there are some things that need to be updated in there, but it is a phenomenal start if you want to pick literally any aspect of life. Pick a thing, anything.
Yeah.
There's something that you can do to help birds, because what's good for humans is good. Well, what's good for birds is good for
For
humans.
everything.
And then the most recent book is Solid Air by Daniel Clem. It's a very thorough read. Not not light bedtime reading, but a fascinating history of window collisions and associated research.
Heidi, Thank you for your time. I hope that not only bird lovers like us have to take care of birds, it's something that society as a whole should commit to and to raise awareness. I would like to share these sounds that I recorded time ago so that we value the happiness they bring us, these incredible, beautiful animals. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was recorded on March 7, 2024.